Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow colleagues. I am honored to be standing in front of you all today to be presenting my research work, which is entitled Strategic Planning in QS Practices, a South African Approach. Again, I am Ms. Thyra Laporte. A quick overview of the presentation. I will start off with an introduction and defining strategic planning, followed by the aim, literature reviewed, and then I will explain the methodology, results, conclusions, recommendations, and finally, I will close off with the acknowledgements. I am sure you are all familiar with the Virgin Group brand. Many of us have often wondered, what is the secret behind Sir Richard Branson's success? In 2012, he made a striking statement saying that companies are not future-proof. Sometimes you have to take your company in a new direction. Why? Because circumstances and opportunities have changed. With a turbulent and unstable business environment, how can one safeguard the future of their business? Do we sit back and rely on faith? No, ladies and gentlemen. There is a secret behind it all, and it is called strategic planning. As you may be aware, strategic planning is a managerial commitment to pursue an agreed set of actions to achieve preset goals. Preset goals, strategic planning. What am I talking about? That is, safeguarding the future of your business by thinking about the foreseen and unforeseen situations that may happen. Strategic planning, Richard Branson. What is my point? Well, the aim of my study was to investigate whether or not there is a relationship between the size of QS firms and the extent of strategic planning they undertake. Let's take a moment to look at what other people say about this. The literature review for the purpose of this presentation has been broken down into 4 categories: existence of strategic planning process, strategic planning flow, formulation, and small firms versus large firms. First of all, existence of strategic planning process. Henderson in 2011 undertook a study, and he suggested that large business firms have more resources available, and it is for this reason that strategic planning is undertaken more extensively in large firms in comparison to smaller firms. And he proceeded by saying that strategic process does not directly generate profit. And as a result, because of the smaller firms having less money, they undertake strategic planning to a lesser extent compared to the larger business firms. This study agreed with Cordero in 2013, where he also found out that strategic planning is a common practice in larger firms in comparison to smaller firms. And he also stated that this is because small firms lack finance and human resources. The second point, strategic planning flow. There are 2 types of strategic planning flow: bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. A bottom-up approach is where subcomponents of an organization take the responsibility for strategic plan. And the top-down approach is when plans are formulated, managed, communicated vertically downwards, meaning from top managers down to the staff. Plant in 2006 undertook a study, and he said that strategic planning process is habitually viewed as a top-down exercise. And this is dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, because frontline staff are excluded from the process, and they have experience and knowledge in the business as well. And this results negatively on the business firm as it creates confusion and miscommunication. The third point, strategic planning formulation. In the same study I was discussing just now, Plan 2006, he said that involvement of non-top managerial employees are often frowned upon by many because both in practice and theory, strategic planning is still treated as traditional and bureaucratic. And finally, strategic planning, small firms versus large firms. SMEs lack strategic planning awareness and plan for long-term competitiveness. This was a conclusion of 10-time study in 2008. Rizzo and Fulford in 2012 found that the common argument for these small business firms they involved in their study is that there is simply no strategy and that small firms react heuristically to events guided by the whims and passions of the owner-manager. I hope you are all still with me. I discussed 4 main points in the literature review, which was existence of strategic planning process, the flow, the formulation, and 2 statements about small firms versus large firms. Now let me move on to the methodology section. A quantitative research was conducted via online survey. The directors of QS firms listed on the ASAQS mailing list was my population. But as you may all know, information about directors of QS firms are not easily accessible. So I had to take a strenuous and time-consuming process to identify the directors. First, I searched the company profiles of the QS firms on the LexisNexis academic database, and once I found out who was the directors, I then cross-referenced it with the mailing list of the ASAQS, and voila, I found their email addresses. And then I had to undertake a pilot study where the questionnaire and the cover letter was sent out via emails to 1 professor, 2 quantity surveyors, 1 statistical analysis, and 1 past NMMU student who also undertook a research. Why did I undertake a pilot study? Well, the reason for undertaking pilot study is not only to make sure that everyone understands the questionnaire, but more importantly, that they all understand it in the same way. The number of QS firms in South Africa was physically counted on the ASAQS online directory. 50% of the population was sampled, personalized emails and non-personalized reminders were sent out, and the questionnaire was also available on the ASAQS website. The data was analyzed using Microsoft Excel, and for the purpose of this presentation, the results will be discussed in terms of percentage. Now, if you could please focus on the table stating categorizing QS firms. For the purpose of discussing the result, there will be 3 categories of QS firms. Small QS firms with up to 3 professional QSs employed, medium-sized QS firms with 4 to 10 professional QSs employed, and large firms with more than 10 professional QSs employed. And now the interesting part, the results. The results will be discussed in 6 categories: existence of strategic planning process, the flow, the formulation, and why does it fail, the plan strategy, and the strategic plan implementation. The first set of results. This graph is showing QS firms with no strategic planning process. And shockingly, 60% of QS firms in South Africa do not have a strategic planning process. This is in comparison to only 8% of large QS firms. And this result, ladies and gentlemen, agrees with the findings of Henderson in 2011 and Cordero in 2013, where they stated that strategic planning process is more of a common exercise undertaken by large business firms in comparison to smaller business firms. The second graph is showing strategic planning flow in QS firms. And again, this result agrees with Plan 2006, where he stated that the top-down approach is more of a common exercise in comparison to the bottom-up approach. Involvement of line managers and staff in strategic plan formulation in QS firms. 26% of small QS firms agreed to involve line managers and staff in strategic planning formulation. This increases slightly to 38% in large firms. However, I believe that this result also agrees with Plan 2006. Why? Because in the different size of QS firms, less than 50% of the respondents agree that line managers and staff should be included in the strategic planning formulation. Failure to formulate strategic plans. Why does the QS firms fail to formulate strategic plans? Small firms and medium-sized firms argued that this is because of time constraints and lack of expertise. Whereas large firms, 15%, which was the most common, was because of time constraints and budget constraints. If you remember, Cordero in 2013 stated that it is the small firms who fail to formulate strategic plans because of lack of finance. But in this study, we find out that the large firms are saying it's because of budget constraints that they are failing to formulate strategic plans. This may be because they are trying to cut down costs because they are being very profitable and lacking, and now they are like, okay, we can cut down on strategic planning since we are getting successful and whatnot. Anyway, yeah. And then QS firms with a planned strategy. 40%, only 40% of small QS firms in South Africa have a planned strategy, ladies and gentlemen. This is in comparison to 85% of large QS firms. And this result agrees with Temtime 2008, where he stated that strategic planning awareness is lacking in small business firms in comparison to large business firms. Across all sizes of QS firms, they all say that day-to-day operations distracted their attention in implementing strategic plan. This, to a certain extent, disagrees with Henderson in 2011, where he stated that it is only the small business firms that fail to implement strategic plan because of day-to-day operation. In this study, we see that the large firms also have the same reason for failing to implement strategic plan. Now for conclusion. Sorry. It is evident from the results that there is a significant difference in the way the different sizes of QS firm perceive strategic planning. The findings of this study provide managers of QS firms with the opportunity to compare the extent of strategic planning they are undertaking with that of the industry as a whole. 60% of small QS firms, to recap, ladies and gentlemen, do not have a strategic planning process in comparison to 7% in large QS firms. Secondly, a top-down approach is more fiercely used in large firms in comparison to smaller firms. And participation of line managers and staff in the strategic planning process is agreed upon by 26% of small QS firms and 38.46% in large QS firms. And only 40% of small QS firms have a planned strategy, while 85% of large QS firms do have one. And across all three sizes of firms, they indicate that day-to-day operation distracted their attention as a reason for not implementing strategic planning. So after all this, am I right to press the red button and say that strategic planning in the different sizes of QS firm, no. Sorry. So, ladies and gentlemen, am I right to push the red button and say that there is a relationship between the size of QS firm and the extent of strategic planning they undertake? Well, I think I can say yes. And for the recommendation, finally, both small and large QS firms need to make use of strategic planning more extensively. One key point from the results obtained was that strategic planning tools are not being exploited by QS firms to create a competitive advantage. A bottom-up approach as the strategic planning flow should be considered. And since strategic planning process as a whole is not a business aspect being scrutinized to reap the endless benefits it could offer, it is important that quantity surveyors are educated further on the importance of strategic planning. How? Maybe by including strategic planning as part of a module in the 4th year in university, or ASAQS undertaking workshop to educate the professional quantity surveyors about the importance of strategic planning. And finally, for acknowledgements, I would like to thank my supervisor, Prof. Crafford, for his guidance and support, my parents, sister, and Leroy for their endless love and encouragement throughout my studies, and all the directors who participated in the research and for their nice, positive feedback about the research. Thank you all immensely. Any questions?
No questions, but well done.
Thank you.
Roy?
Thanks, Thyra. I think the results was actually accepted the outcome thereof. I've just said maybe a personal perception is that would you regard if a one-man business, does he still need a strategic plan if his view is that I'm going to stay a one-man business and I'm happy with the amount of work that I've got?
Okay. Thank you for your question. I believe that a one-man business should have a strategic plan in place because the future will be equally easy or difficult for both a one-man business or a large firm, and he should prepare himself for what might come his way in the future. And strategic planning is not only about having a certain amount of work, but also maybe creating a competitive advantage in the industry or focusing on a niche market. So I believe that, yeah.
Sure. Both?
Volley, no questions.
Benita?
Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Kamali's touched on, is that you must also assess the firm's needs before we say that they should apply strategic management. So you touched on maybe investigating the importance of it for those different firms, especially when you have a small firm somewhere in the Karoo with no competition versus a firm in Johannesburg. There is going to be a difference there. So just that comment.
Okay, if I could add on to this, I think that maybe this might be a field for further research, maybe investigating how a one-man business who is undertaking strategic planning, what's the difference between a one-man business undertaking strategic planning and one who's not undertaking strategic planning, and maybe this can be a new study. Yeah.
Yes, thanks from my side as well. Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Especially considering it's your third language. But from my side as well, just to tie on to the comments that were made already, I think it's very important, and I don't know exactly how you defined it, but strategic management for each one of those groups. Because if you say there's a lack of, say for example, you say there's a lack of line managers involved, you know, is there a line manager in a small company? You know, is it not just a direct, you know, superior versus a junior relationship? So that kind of can potentially skew it. And then also, how do you define that that's strategic management at each one of those levels? In a big company, there's various different aspects in terms of growth and sustainability, and in a smaller company it changes a little bit, and then in a one-man show it changes completely. You know, so I think it's very relevant. But there is, I think, for future reference and for future research, you need to identify very specific aspects of strategic planning to be able to implement that throughout consistently. Otherwise, it's good.
If I may add on to this again, most of the one-man business who I emailed, they emailed me back and said that they won't be able to fill in my questionnaire because they do not undertake strategic planning. So most of the results that I showed today are not from one-man business. It must be more than maybe 2 or 3 2 or 3 employees upwards. Yeah.
Like I say, I just think, you know, that each one of them defines it slightly differently, perhaps, and there's various different aspects that comes into play. But overall, yes.
Thank you.
Flo, you going?
Yeah, very nice presentation. I can see the relevance of the results in the South African context. The one weakness I see is making the comparison with international views, in that the very largest firms in South Africa are small in terms of some of the international countries. You ever look at Hong Kong and places like that, I mean, we've got perhaps 200 or 300 people in an office. So it's relevant to South Africa, but I think the reference or comparison with overseas is not comparing apples with apples.
Yes, there are 2 firms that I know that are listed, South African firms listed on the New York Stock Exchange. The one has 9,300 employees. And those firms are answerable primarily, if you analyze it, to shareholders. So who actually forces the strategic plan of a firm when you've got a board that represents shareholders guiding investment where they want dividends, they want the money? And so strategic planning takes different forms in different areas. But I see a job for you: facilitation of strategic management. Maybe because you understand and you have the conversation of the profession and you understand the ins and outs of the cat's ear, you can guide your facilitation strategies, if I can use your word, to the size of firm that you're working with. One question would be, do you want to accept state commissions and parastatal and provincial, or do you want to just accept private sector work? Very different strategy if you're working along those two lines. So consider perhaps facilitation of strategic planning, which is, according to your study, essential.
Please.
Keith?
Thanks, Thyra. Strategic planning can take, it's quite a wide and broad area. I take it from your research that you're talking about formalized strategic planning, because when I look at the size of the companies there, that below 3 QSs of it, one thinks that strategic planning definitely does take place, but not in a formalized approach, as you might be indicating, where it's necessary in a larger organization. Was that looked at all, that the different methods of strategic planning was covered within those different groups?
Thank you for your question. When showing the first set of results, I focused on if a company do actually have a strategic planning process that they are undertaking. It doesn't matter if it's formalized or not formalized. And the last set of results was focused on if they actually have a plan strategy, a formal plan strategy in place. So maybe the non-formalized strategic planning was reflected in the first set of results, and the last ones was indicated in the last set of results. So I think, in general, it was incorporated, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.